So we're talking here about Gustafson's essay on grief, and there are a few sort of essential points in this essay. It's a really long essay. It's very involved, but maybe the first thing to point out is that after section 1, which is a brief introductory section, section 2 is really generally a section about emotions in general. That is, before Gustafson gets to his point about the specific emotion of grief, which is of course what the essay is about, he wants to develop a theory of the emotions in general, and this is to set up his final conclusions about the emotion of grief. So there's a few things that we want to go over in that second section, and then in the next video we'll focus on section 3, which is really the heart of the essay and the part that I want you to concentrate on, and the part that is most relevant for us. One of the things he starts out is saying, grief is a feeling, and philosophers have spent a lot of time over the centuries talking about feelings and trying to understand just what they are, but feelings are difficult, difficult to grasp in a sort of rational way because they're feelings. So he knows it's a difficult thing. What is grief? I mean, what is a feeling? And he's got definite ideas. I mean, one of the things he points out in the beginning is that the specific emotion of grief, and he thinks there is a specific emotion called grief, has not always been recognized as being a specific emotion. He points out in the beginning that in ancient Greek, there was no specific word for grief. That is, the grief was referred to with the general word they had for pain. No, I mean, that's what it is, but he wants to, despite that, give some account of just what grief is. That is, what are the essential characteristics of grief? What is it that makes grief different from other emotions? And specifically, what is it that makes grief different from sorrow? I mean, if there's any sort of point you should be really looking for in this essay, is that is, he imagines sorrow as a more general emotion that has certain specific conditions, when we feel sorrow, etc. But grief is a much more specific emotion, feeling, and he wants to a large degree, differentiate sorrow generally from grief specifically. And one of the first things I think is really important here in the introduction and in section 2 is his use of the terms rationality and warrantability and unwarrantability, and things like conditions of rationality applied to grief. That's actually quite important. And section 2 is really a general account of the emotions with that notion of rationality or conditions of rationality really at the center of it, because that's, again, what he wants. He's setting up with this general account of emotions, the specific account of grief that he'll give in section 3, and then defend in section 4, I guess. One of the things that he wants to say about emotions, for instance, on page 458, is that emotions are cognitively penetrable psychological states or processes. Cognitive penetrability consists in this setting in the fact that a state or condition is determined, in part at least, by the beliefs and goals of its host. Now, what does that mean, this cognitive penetrability, in terms of emotions? And that is, emotions, what I think he's saying is that emotions don't just happen. They're not spontaneous internal things that simply happen in a subject, in a human being. They're cognitively penetrable in the sense that our emotions and our feelings are connected to our beliefs and our goals as acting, thinking subjects. So that it's possible, if you have a feeling, to ask, why do you have a feeling? And oftentimes the why is answered by reference to beliefs and desires that we have. For instance, I'm happy right now, let's say. it may not be the case. I'm just not, I'm not just spontaneously happy. I'm happy because of something. Say the Phillies win the World Series. Okay, that's a belief that I have. So if my happiness right now could be said to be cognitively penetrable, it's because of or associated with my belief that the Phillies have won the World Series. So cognitive meaning having to do with knowledge. So what he's basically saying is that our emotions are, at least sometimes, connected with our beliefs about the world, our belief that something has happened or has not happened. And you can see this in his first pass of the definition of grief on page 458. He says, as a first approximation, grief might be something like a deep unhappiness essentially tied to a belief or judgment that someone has died. So that's presuming that grief is cognitively penetrable there, and that is that we have a deep unhappiness and it is tied to a belief or judgment that we have, in this case, that someone has died. So that notion of it being cognitively penetrable is really just the fact that our feelings or emotions are tied to things that we know or at least believe about the world. There's a lot of other stuff here. Crucially, on page 459, he says, if emotions are then cognitively penetrable in that they are partially determined by associated beliefs, judgments, or appraisals, then they are equally, and for that reason, open to some degree of rational evaluation, to the giving of reasons. They can be rationally grounded or warranted or unwarranted. As well, they can fail in these regards and are subject to types of irrationality. That is, if emotions are tied to beliefs, that is, if they're cognitively penetrable, then it's possible to say of an emotion that it is rational or irrational. When we think about that, that is, it may be that our belief that is associated with the emotion is absolutely irrational. That is, I'm sad right now. Oh, why are you sad? I'm sad because the moon is made of green cheese and I'd like some, but I can't reach that high. Okay? Now, that would be an instance of an irrational emotion because it's tied to an irrational belief. Now, other types, as we'll see, of irrational emotions may be tied to true beliefs, but the emotions may in some way or another be completely disproportionate to the belief. I'm devastatingly sad right now. Oh, why? Because I can't find the channel changer. Now, we could say that that's irrational too, in the sense that, yeah, I mean, it's true that the channel changer was lost, but it's a disproportionate emotional response to that belief to be devastatingly sad. I mean, you could be annoyed, you could be, a little bit angry that the thing has disappeared and will never be found again, probably. But to be devastated by it is irrational. So a lot of what he's doing in section 2 is really trying to establish that emotions in general are tied to our beliefs, maybe not in any kind of specific way all the time, but that they are tied to beliefs and that they are open then to rational evaluation. Now, another really key part of it is on page 462, him saying in the second paragraph, as is clear from the conative aspects of emotions. Now, conation, we'll talk about that perhaps a little in the next. Conation has to do with feeling, wanting, desiring. As is clear from the conative aspects of emotions, they provide motive force and are apt for producing actions. So another thing that he's saying about emotions is that emotions motivate actions. Emotions prompt actions. That is, he mentions hate. If I hate someone, or if I'm angry with someone, that's an emotion. But an emotion naturally prompts some action on my part, and oftentimes that action is meant to alleviate, or if it's a bad emotion, to end it by telling somebody how I feel, or by yelling at them, I guess, or by in some way or another doing something with regard to this emotion or feeling that will satisfied. So that's actually quite important what he says